Hello and welcome back to, or for the first time, or the second or the third, who knows, welcome to the channel. Anyways, that's what I'm trying to say here. Today I'm going to be talking about some of my favourite reads of all time, so hopefully you enjoy that. Today I'll be talking about my 80th favourite read to the 71st, as this is going to be one of a series of videos where I combat 10 of my favourites each time until we get to that number one spot. Of course, this is an utterly subjective list, and I'm even changing it around from minute to minute. It was really hard to create this, and the books, whilst most of them would always be in my list, the position they are somewhat changes. So whilst I am ranking them from 80th to 71st, they are quite flexible in where they would be if I did this video tomorrow. But let's get straight into it and talk about my 80th favourite read. And that is The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. He is an absolutely brilliant author and I love this book. So yes, this is one of my favourites by his. You may see another one of his books higher up on this list. Perhaps not in this video, but in one of the videos to come that is talking about my favourites, of course. But we're talking about The Knife of Never Letting Go at this moment. So there's a very interesting premise, and that is about a boy called Todd who is growing up in a town where everyone can hear everyone's thoughts. So no matter what you're thinking, whether it's mundane, what it's about, whether it's about getting up in the morning or something you need to go buy from the shop, everyone can hear what you're thinking. And so yes, that sounds pretty chaotic, but it's done so well. And they can even hear the thoughts of animals, and that is done so brilliantly in this. For those who love animal companions, one of my favourite duos is Todd with a dog in this. And the dog, it talks like you imagine a dog would. Pretty stunted language and mostly honed in, focused on one thing. And let's be honest, it's mostly going to be about food, isn't it? But this relationship is done so well, and how the attachment between them grows as the story goes on. It's absolutely beautifully done. But whilst I said everyone can hear everyone's thoughts, they cannot hear the thoughts of women. And Todd grows up in an all-male town, and at the beginning you don't really know what's happened. You know he's the youngest, or one of the youngest in the village, so there's a bit of a mystery there. And for some reason or another, Todd leaves his village, and he is brought into a gritty, harsh world that is quite cruel. And throughout his story, as he bumps into some people and he gets roped into what is going on with them, and some are being hunted, it's working into the wider political landscape of this world. What is going on? Why can people hear each other's thoughts? And why can you not hear women's thoughts? It's working into all of that. It's quite philosophical in many ways, and it really combats the themes of group mentality, the effects of colonialism and identity as well. So it's very powerful, and it's one of those that I utterly loved when I've read it quite a few years ago now, but I need to read it again. I'll be very interested to see how my thoughts perhaps differ from last time and what I kind of spot on a reread. And I don't have a physical copy on hand, so that's why the cover is appearing on the screen, because my friend Millie borrowed this book about 4 or 5 years ago. Well, I say borrowed, but when does borrowing become stealing? If someone can let me know that answer in the comments below. But yes, Millie, if you're watching, I think that I'm going to be hunting you down soon with the charge of thievery on my lips. But yeah, that is The Knife of Never Letting Go. Next up in the 79th spot, I have The Crimson Campaign by Brian McLaren. This is the second installment of a fantasy series inspired by the French Revolution. So yes, I do love a fantasy series inspired by history, and this series does a brilliant job of doing that and transferring it to a fantasy landscape. But yes, so this is the second installment. It follows Promise of Blood and the revolution which General Tamas, one of our leading POVs, was so integral in starting, has escalated to all-out war with its neighbours, whilst there's still political havoc internally as well. So that's really interesting, the political landscape that we are thrust into. And the magic is done through, it's to do with gunpowder, which is very interesting with these kind of musket weapons where they're matchlock, so one shot and then it's kind of done for a little while. It takes a long time to reload. But anyway, so this is a book where we find an enemy stuck in enemy territory. An army stuck in enemy territory. I think I just said an enemy in enemy territory. But anyway, carrying on from that mistake. But then we also have 2 other POVs that are very interesting who kind of interlink with that. And then we have a detective who is in the main city, and his name is Adamat, Detective Adamat. He is a brilliant character, and he's trying to find where his family have gone, and he's being roped into the political goings-on of the capital. And I love how these kind of POVs really link together. At first quite widely, you see some little links of what is going on, what it's escalating to, and then there's a very climactic crescendo of an ending. And Brian McClellan writes in quite a stripped back way, which is very efficient, does very good at crafting tone and atmosphere, which is filled with tension and really builds on the world, just so it just feels very vivid and fresh. And so yes, this is really enjoyable, great matchlock fantasy for anyone looking for that sort of thing. Next up, in spot number 78, I have The Wolf of Wessex by Matthew Harvey. This is historical fiction set in 9th century England, I believe. And this is a standalone, which we do love a standalone. It's not huge as well, which is great because I am a wide reader of fantasy and historical fiction. And for anyone else who out there who's watching this, who also reads those genres, you know that a lot of those reads can be pretty chunky and very long series as well. So it's nice to have something a bit shorter that you can get through and still really enjoy. So this is about a solitary veteran who has retired from the world, basically. He's put down his weapons and he's vowed not to pick them up again, and he lives with his dog. So another book with an animal companion. Can you guess what I like in books? Yes, I do love a great dog because I am an animal lover, and so yeah, I've got to have them in my books as well, don't I? But this is about this soldier. He's wandering out, getting some food basically in the woods. I'm simplifying this a lot, but this is the beginning of the premise, and he finds someone who is murdered, and then he finds a girl hiding not far away who was related to that. She's not part of the murder, but she was with the person who was killed. She doesn't know why. She managed to escape, and he gets just taken into this mystery, trying to protect her. And it's that conflict that does he pick his weapons up again? Is it better to do that and hurt others in order to protect someone else, or is that a sin and evil in itself? So The Wolf of Wessex is really great in that kind of character analysation of self-sacrifice, and the mystery is done really well, and there are little flourishes of humour spread out throughout this as well, which I think was really well done. And there's a great tone and atmosphere crafted for what 9th century England feels like. It's quite gritty, but there's that ability to really isolate yourself and live your own life as well, which I found very interesting. And yeah, The Wolf of Wessex, really enjoyable, great standalone, one I'd recommend to a huge variety of readers because, as I said, this has got a mystery in there for people who like that, but then it's set it's obviously historical fiction set in the 9th century, so yeah, it's got a bit for everyone, I believe. Next up in the spot, number 77, I have Half the World by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second instalment in the Shattered Sea trilogy. This is lesser known compared to his first lore. It's advertised as YA. It's young adult in the sense that I'd say Patrick Ness is as well. It's not following those kind of YA tropes that people associate with it when that kind of title is put on them. But yeah, this is really entertaining. Joe Abercrombie brings his gritty world into Shattered Sea, and he writes so well. Thorn, Brand, and Father Yarvey. Finally, I got the word out. Are three of, in my opinion, his best characters, and the way that they link in this is brilliant. Thorn is a very hard and tough woman. Brand is a warrior who does not want to kill, and so Thorn sees him as a bit of a weakling, and their dynamic is brilliant. And then Father Yarvey is the main perspective in book one, and he's a bit older now, and they are seeking allies to fight against the High King. And so this is a voyage where they're looking for those allies, as I said, and it's an odyssey both internally of their own growth and finding out who they are and learning to trust other people, but then also in the sense that they travel throughout this world and we discover a lot more about the continent that we are placed in, that Joe Abercrombie throws us into. He's a great writer, absolutely hilarious with his dialogue, one of the best dialogue writers out there, and he just never ever fails. So yeah, Joe Abercrombie is one of my favourite authors, and this will definitely not be the last book of his that you see on this list. In the number 76 spot, I have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is a brilliant book which needs no introduction. This is a frightening and shocking dystopian tale which is truly haunting. Yes, many people have said why they love this book, probably in a much better way than I'm about to, but here are just a few thoughts. So first off, the premise: the handmaids are viewed as objects whose sole purpose is to have children, because this is a world and time it's set slightly in the future from when it was written. Now it would be the past, but it was in the future of when it was written, and the premise was that children are far far rarer. And so the handmaids are women that can have children, and they're viewed as objects. Their sole purpose is to have children. They are dehumanized, and it is a brutal tale in that sense. And our perspective, the story is told from the perspective of a handmaid, and this shows that the prose is absolutely brilliant because it's very... It feels very smooth, that's the way to put it. And so when these terrible things happen, there's such a melancholic tone which carries on the story. And it's the way that these events are told as if they're normal, which is the truly tragic part of this story. It's not like it's a one-time occurrence. This is the life she has been thrown to. And she still has some childhood memories of what life was like before this new regime took over. And so yes, this is a story... dystopian story. It shares many themes with the typical dystopian books that you think of. It's about that lack of power, being stripped of your own free will, and their own individualism being taken away, as well as everyone has to adhere to certain rules. Whilst the handmaids are in a horrendous position, there are some better off and there's some worse off, but all of them have to adhere to the rules that have been set, and they cannot stray out of that. And this is a brilliant story, and it ends wonderfully as well. Well, wonderful, not saying happy, but wonderfully as in brilliantly written, and it is so impactful. I've not read the sequel, but I believe it may have won the Booker Prize, so I'm planning a video in the future of ranking some Booker books that I've read, so maybe I'll fit in the testaments before I get to that. But yeah, that is my 76th favourite book. So we're now entering the latter half of the books that I'm talking about this video, and the 75th spot goes to The Pale Horseman by Bernard Cornwell. This is the second instalment of the Saxon stories, better known now as The Last Kingdom, as it has been adapted onto the screen in a Netflix series. And this book forms the second half of season 1, if you wanted that reference point, if you're watching the program, or if you've watched it in the past. So yes, this is following Uhtred, son of Uhtred of Bebbanburg. So this is brilliant. I absolutely adore this installment. There are highs and lows to this series, and this is definitely a high. This is when Uhtred is still battling with his conflict of identity, which really drives the heart of this story, whilst on a more epic level, it's about Alfred the Great attempting to unite the Kingdom of England under one banner, under one kingdom. But as I said, within that we've got a more intimate story of Uhtred himself. He was born a Saxon, raised a Dane, and so there's that conflict of which side is he on, and he is a very honourable fellow, so when he has sworn an oath he keeps to it, but that does not mean that he does not feel this heavy sense of duty upon him, and the tragedy as well, at times having to go against those that he loves and or whose side he'd rather be on. But The Pale Horseman is particularly interesting in my opinion anyway, and also my brother Ed, this is his favourite book in the series. It's our favourite because this is where Uhtred is given a leadership role, and it's him coming to grips with that, and you see whether it fits him or whether it doesn't, and maybe it does in some ways, maybe it doesn't in others. And I think it's so well told. Bernard Cornwell's strength is his characters, and they're absolutely brilliant. I love Uhtred, and as a character-driven reader, obviously, this is a story for me. In number 74, I have A Clockwork Orange, and I read this for my English studies at college, and I thought it was an absolutely brutal book, but a fantastically written one. I really enjoyed it, and I chose this book to be one of a subsidiary text in one of my coursework essays. So yes, I really enjoyed A Clockwork Orange. I think there's a lot to dive into here, but it's a really engaging and riveting read as well. So it is a story in which we follow a man named Alex, a young man, and at the beginning we follow him and his droogs, his gang, and then the story goes from there, and we are told the story from the charismatic narrator of Alex himself. And for those who like Mark Lawrence's writing, Prince of Thorns' Jorg Ancraft was inspired by the character Alex. But anyway, I'm talking about A Clockwork Orange for now. So yes, this is a book where he is a terrible, despicable human being who goes around just committing atrocities with his droogs, his gang, and he just sees everyone else as playthings that he can use for his own enjoyment. And through one way or another, he gets roped into the Ludovico technique, which he agrees to do for a kind of deal. I won't give too much away, but the Ludovico technique is aversion therapy. So it's a form of aversion therapy that he thinks will get him an easy sentence when he's caught. But this is a very different type of therapy than he was expecting, and I was expecting to read about. It is brutal, it is horrifying, and this is a shocking story which is about how far do you go as punishment and what should you do to make sure people aren't a threat when they are released from prison. It's got a lot of those philosophical questions in there, but it's also about humanity's innate evil at times as well, and not always to the certain extent that Alex takes it, but also the surrounding characters. All of them are just serving their own purposes. It's pretty nihilistic in some senses, I would say, because Alex is by far the most evil of them all, but the rest of the characters, they are pretty reprehensible as well. They are amoral, I would say, where they're just serving their own purposes and they will do anything to help themselves, really. It's not about anyone around them, and they do not care if they impact others or how they do. But I think that what really drives the story is the charismatic narration of Alex himself, because he is looking back on this time, and the unreliable narration also adds another layer where you're thinking, is this true? Is this really how these events unfolded? And what is he trying to do? Why is he trying to tell this story? And so yeah, it's really interesting looking at it from that perspective as well. And yes, this is one that I definitely really feel that urge to pick up again. And yeah, so A Clockwork Orange is my 74th favourite read. Next up in the 73rd position, I have Midnight Falcon by David Gemmell. This is the second instalment in the Regante quartet, but the first two books are almost a duology by their own, and the next two follow on a few hundred years later. But yes, you can read just the first two, and I would highly recommend them. Midnight Falcon is the second instalment, and we follow Bane, who is a brilliant character. He's seen as a bit of an outcast of society. I won't say why because it spoils parts of book one, but yes, he's a bit of an outcast, and that really weighs heavily on him, and it leads to him leaving the land that he is born in. And if I go a bit wider for the moment, so the premise of this book is that stone, which is inspired by the Roman Empire, is trying to take over the territory and land and peoples of the Celtic tribes, who are known as the Regante. So it's inspired by that, and it's in a fantasy world. And yes, so the people of stone are trying to assimilate and conquer these tribes, and obviously the Regante do not want that to happen. So in this story, Midnight Falcon, Bane goes into the land of stone, and there's a gladiator-esque sequence in here which he really learns about the culture of stone, and he returns to his land afterwards. And this is a story which is really about the highs and lows of humanity, and it is so much about that sense of belonging, but also that sense of duty and also destiny, not in the sense of something is set out for you, but this is what he was born for. He was born for something, and also that he is an outcast for something which is not his own fault, so he could not do anything to change that. It is something which has happened in the past. So this is a story full of tragedy and heroism, love and loss, hope and despair. It is truly a roller coaster of a journey, which is about fighting for those you love, but also that really important sense of fighting for something greater than you as well. I absolutely love Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, and I find it kind of engages with some of those similar themes of the importance of being engaged in something that you feel is greater than yourself, and there is a inspirational aspect to that idea of you would sacrifice that yourself for something that you see to be greater. And in this example of Midnight Falcon, it's about trying to keep alive the culture and the peoples of the Regante. And Bane and Conover are two of the most iconic characters that I believe David Gemmell created, and I absolutely love Midnight Falcon, and I highly recommend it. So in the number 73 spot, I have The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the culmination of the historical fantasy trilogy, which is the Winter Night trilogy, if you could guess. But yeah, so this is the culmination of a series that I absolutely adore. Vasilissa is a brilliant leading character, Vassia for short, I'll say that instead, but she's such an engaging leading character who goes through such an odyssey throughout this trilogy, and this brilliantly wraps up it all. It's a brilliant culmination of events which really comments on the themes that it's engaged with in the first two books, but it really shows that Vassia has become her own person. This is set in medieval Russia during the time of Mongolian rule, and it's the time where the country is trying to overthrow that Mongolian rule, but this is historical fantasy, so it is engaging with Russian folklore, and especially a lot of those Russian folklore creatures, which I think is absolutely done brilliantly. Vassia can converse with these creatures, whereas many cannot, and in the first book, The Bear and the Nightingale, she takes it upon herself to befriend these and keep them alive, and this is where her journey has taken her. Obviously, this is the third book in the series, so I cannot say too much without spoiling what happened before, but That is what I can say. And I think that Catherine Arden does a brilliant job, absolutely fantastic job. She's got a talent for creating a tone and atmosphere of magical mysticism, but also of dread, because there is something that you know is going to happen, but you don't know quite how it is going to unfold or come about. And so it's that sense of dread which is even occurring during the happier moments here, which really drives this story. And I think it is done brilliantly. And yeah, this is a winter read, The Winter of the Witch, could you believe it or not? So we're getting to that time of year where it will be perfect to pick up The Bear and the Nightingale and the Winter Night trilogy. And yes, definitely highly recommend this to all sorts of readers, not just fantasy, not just historical fantasy, not just historical fiction. I think there's a bit here for everyone, and I'd highly recommend this series. In the number 71st spot, I have Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, book 1 of the Book of the Ancestor trilogy. Red Sister is absolutely brilliant in my opinion. If you take Mark Lawrence's stripped back, efficient prose and then partner that with a leading character who has some similarities to Wolverine, what more could you ask for? But before I get any further into talking about Red Sister, I'm just going to read the opening line. I may need my glasses. No, I'll be alright. It is important when killing a nun to ensure that you bring an army of sufficient size. So yeah, there you go. That is the opening line, and definitely not one you hear in many places. That is very unique. And so Nona Grey, our main character, who, as I said, has certain similarities to Wolverine, is taken to a warrior nun school. Unique again. So yes, we have that warrior school trope present in Red Sister, but it is not dry, or perhaps it's not regurgitating what we've seen before. It is like Bloodsong and Empire of the Vampire, but it also takes us in a different direction, because Mark Lawrence does a really successful job, in my opinion, of making us engaged and creating a riveting read where Nona Grey learns what she is meant to learn at this school, and also her dynamic with her classmates is done really well. And the way that their relationship grows into friendship or enemy, friend or foe, I won't say, but whatever it is, Mark Lawrence does a fantastic job, and I'd highly recommend Red Sister. So there you go, that is my favourite reads, 80 to 71. I've really enjoyed talking about these 10 books. It's always fun to talk about your favourite reads, and even though I've just finished, I would actually move the books around that list slightly differently. So as I said at the beginning, this is completely subjective, and even to me, my list is changing minute by minute. But hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know if you've read any of these, if they intrigued you, or what you would recommend if there are any books similar to what I've talked about. But thank you so much for watching. I'll have more videos like this coming along in the future, as well as some book reviews and talking about uni perhaps. And yes, I have a lot planned. Do let me know in the comments below also if there's any specific content you would like me to talk about, or if you want me to do a review of some of these books in this video. But everyone, as I said, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe. William Gwynne.